So, The Last of Us has ended. I won't spoil anything. I'm gonna record my own separate little spoiler review that I'm gonna add it into this later. But yeah, it was real good. I do have some criticism of the last episode that may seem like a nitpick to a lot of people, but it really hampered my enjoyment of that last episode. It doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the show overall, or even the impact of the moment that they were doing, but it hit harder in the game because it made more sense within the story of the game, but not as much in the show. But again, I'll talk about that in my own little spoiler free thing. Spoiler full thing. Um,
So moving on to the spoiler section of The Last of Us discussion. The Last of Us season 1 so far has been easily the best live action video game adaptation we've ever seen. We've had some good animated video game adaptations like Castlevania, but in terms of live action, they've been not so good. Naughty Dog has another live action adaptation of one of their games, Uncharted, that in comparison to The Last of Us, is honestly kind of embarrassing. Part of what makes this adaptation so good is this quote from Neil that he says in one of the kind of like behind the scenes videos that HBO has in at the end of their shows. And he says, "My philosophy on this show has always been, when should we deviate and when should we come back? If it's kind of the same or worse, we stay where the game is. If it's better, we deviate." And that's just a solid philosophy. When making something like this, you want the people working on it to revere the game, to love the game so much that they aren't convinced that every single thing they do will be elevated in comparison to the source material. Someone who respects the game greatly and doesn't think every single change that they make is godlike and elevates it, completely. As well as having someone like Neil Druckmann, who was a lead on the original game, on the source material, working on the project. And when you have those two things combined, someone who isn't going to make all these changes because they think they're better, and someone who understands the source material through and through and understands what they could have done better, you have something like this that is similar yet different in all the right ways. Despite that, I have one complaint about the final episode. So, it doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the show as a whole, but I feel like this version of Joel taking out all of those soldiers in the hospital isn't feasible. I feel like they spent a lot of time showing us that this version of Joel wasn't a one-man army, that this show is much more grounded. It's not a video game, it's not an action game, so you aren't required to perform as much action. Therefore, this Joel is much more realistic. He's much weaker. He's an old man. They show this over and over again. Just for, in the last episode, for him to do something that seems impossible in the world that they set up, in the physicality of the Joel that they set up. I think it would have been much like he walked down the middle of hallways shooting a gun and he didn't get a scratch. He wasn't even winded by the end. I think that if they showed him sneaking around, taking people out, maybe getting caught every now and again, maybe getting grazed by a bullet, maybe getting punched in the face, or like something, showing that that he gets at least a little bit hurt, that he's winded, that he's tired, that he went about it in a smart way that like makes sense, that's feasible for a person, this version of Joel to have gotten through all those people in the hospital and gotten out with Ellie makes sense, to make it make sense, rather than doing it exactly like the game did, which it works for the game's world, but in my opinion it doesn't work for the world of the show. But that's really the only kind of nitpick I have about the show. Overall, fantastic, and I'm really excited to see part 2 adapted.
but yeah, it's getting a season 2. That was announced a while ago, but they've people working on the show have said that season 2 will require at least 2 seasons. And yeah, I figured as much. It's a pretty long game. It's like 25 hours. I haven't even finished my second playthrough of it because it's so long. I started to play it a little bit again when I was watching the show, but I haven't gotten around to finishing it. Yeah, and it follows two separate characters going on like essentially what they both were doing on the same day at different times. Or excuse me, not different times, same time, different locations. So yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see how they do it. They split like first season is one character, second season is another character, or if they go back and forth between the characters within the same season. I'm excited to see how they do it. And but Last of Us Part Two, controversial game, but uh, very divisive. But it personally, I like it significantly more than the first game. Like legitimately, to me, it's just everything about it in terms of the characters and the story is just so much more. It's even more black and that's why it's so divisive because so much of it is black and white, and there's so many characters doing things that you don't want them to do, and that you don't necessarily agree with, or characters that you don't like doing things that you do agree with, and you're just conflicted, and that caused so much strife on the internet because people don't know how to just have a respectful conversation when they disagree with someone. They have to get upset and you know insult people or threaten them, and like it's okay that you can have these conversations. You can disagree with people. Just be polite, please. Like
Right.
because what this does, and I've said this before, and I'll always keep saying it until something changes, it results in people just being tired of it and them saying that we should just stop doing these things that we can't stop doing, like debating. As long as we're in a world where we have free will equals a world where we'll have different opinions, and different opinions will cause debates, will cause arguments. And instead of telling people to stop doing something that they can't not do, which is have different opinions, we should be telling people how to do it in a way that is constructive rather than destructive, in a way
Right.
that is respectful and isn't insulting, that isn't threatening. But anyway, I'm excited for the next season of this show.